There is a battle looming over Australian borders, and it's not the traditional one that we've come to remember. You might know the open slather refugee policies of the Rudd-Gillard era, which was effectively the Labor-Green alliance versus the Coalition's stronger border protection plan. This time, though, the battle is between business and the government. It was kicked off by Virgin CEO Jane Hrdlicka, who warned Australia risked getting left behind if international borders did not open until the middle of next year. She acknowledged it will make us sick, but won't put us into hospital. Some people may die, but it will be way smaller than the flu. Today, Hrdlicka was joined by Flight Centre boss Graham Turner, who told The Australian it was fair enough to assume people would die from COVID-19 in Australia, just like 2,000 died from the flu each year, and a myriad of other causes. I thought it was quite well said, he said. People will die from COVID. People will just have to accept that. Well, look, I get it. A couple of people whose entire business is dependent on travel are talking their own business book. But they do have a point, don't they? According to the PM, no, they don't. He was having none of it today, and he slammed the comments as insensitive, claiming the pandemic was morphing and raging overseas.
During the course of this pandemic, Australia have avoided 30,000 lives lost when you compare it to the average fatality rate of like countries in the OECD. 30,000 lives could have otherwise have been lost had we not had the success we've had as a country working together. And so I think that has to be understood, and I regret that those comments were somewhat insensitive.
All right. Although I happen to agree with the PM about the restrictions on international travel, I do have to make this call. The PM saying avoiding deaths of 30,000. It sounds like a totally made-up figure to me. And how would we know? He's talking about international comparisons, but we know the numbers overseas were all doctored up as well. Do you remember right at the start of this pandemic when the modelling on which the government pandemic response was based said that 250,000 Australian lives would be lost? At the time I said it was nonsensical and that the models were absolute rubbish. Well, those comments proved to be absolutely true. So where did the 30,000 lives saved figure come from? Well, I have no doubt it's from some more junk modelling, and the PM knows that his claim is almost impossible to disprove. I've said it before, and I'm going to keep saying this because it's absolutely true. Politicians love saving us from a crisis, not preventing one, and they don't want to save us from being in a crisis. There's a subtle difference. You see, if they prevent something happening, then they get no credit for it. You just say, oh, they're lying, they were crying wolf. So for political authority, they need to overstate the severity of the issue that's facing us all, scare you witless, and then have you experience less pain than they originally forecast for you. And that way, you might actually thank them and give them a vote at the next election. Anyway, not content with the 30,000 lives saved, the PM then pushed the sympathy button.
910 Australians have lost their lives. Every single one of those lives was a terrible tragedy. And it doesn't matter how old they were.
All right, again, I want to look past the superficial, and I want you to consider that 169,000 Australians actually died in 2019, including more than 4,000 from influenza. That's the flu. And that same year, more infants died than those allegedly killed by COVID-19 in 2020. Now, I don't recall any tragedy statements about those deaths by the PM, or the acceptance that if only would close down the economy for the entire year previous, some of those lives would have indeed been saved. So let's acknowledge that every death is a heartfelt event for someone, but we cannot wrap ourselves in cotton wool forever. Let's accept that we all have an expiry date, and it's reasonable to think that a life taken prematurely is more tragic than a life lost in its 9th decade, even one that's lost through government incompetence. And in fact, that's exactly what governments usually do. When it comes to the PBS or other health policies, they actually measure the cost of decisions through life years saved or lost. I just wonder why they're starting to flip the script right now.